Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 53 of ZK Live. Tonight we have Isaac and Maria from Whetstone Workshop. They are a super high-end architectural metalwork company based out of Rhode Island, but they do projects all over New England. Super talented team of craftspeople. They do design, build, sort of the whole thing from start to finish. I'm really excited to talk to them about how they were able to penetrate the ultra high-end market. It's not an easy place. They don't invite people in. I don't really know how they got there, but they're working for some of the highest end projects in New England today. Just crazy projects, crazy budgets. They're going to be on any second here, and we'll bring them on. But the level of work that they do there's nothing. I've never seen anything like it. There's a very small handful of metal workers that can execute at the level that they're on, and to be able to sell work for the price that it costs to do what they do. I'm very interested to deconstruct that whole process because, that's always my goal too. How do I find clients and sell clients on a more expensive product and process?
Hi, Zach.
Hello.
Going.
What's going on?
Not too much. We're in the office at 7 o'clock at night.
Doing our first Instagram live video.
Well, welcome. This is going to be fun. It's just like we're hanging out in real life. It's just there's a screen that we're staring at.
It is good to see your face.
You too. I feel like I was just there.
You were. I have all my notes from our meeting right here.
So for people who don't know Whetstone Workshop, can you just tell us a little bit about what you guys do?
Sure. So we're a high-end architectural metal fabricator, and we do high level of finish on all sorts of metal objects, from furniture, lighting, stairs, doors, all the way up to sculptures and monuments. And we pride ourselves on kind of doing all of it from design through installation.
It's the level of craftsmanship is out of control. How many people are in the company? What does it look like today?
It's myself, Maria, and then we have 3 employees right now.
Awesome. And you two are married?
We are.
Yes, we are.
So
You have an awesome daughter and an awesome dog.
Yes, we left both of them at home. There'd be just way too much going on with both of them here.
There would be gymnastics going on in the background.
Yes, there would be.
Correct. And lots of barking.
So three people in the shop, and Isaac, you're doing the work as well.
Mm-hmm.
Did it always look like that? Did you start out just on your own? What did the beginning look like?
So the beginning of Whetstone definitely was just myself, and we kind of grew very organically of just kind of adding on depending on the work. And I think we've been in business for about 10 years, and for the first probably 5, it was just me and one other person. And then, we had a little bit of rapid growth with a lot of employees, and then realized that I'm not a very good manager, and kind of ratcheted that back to a much smaller, tighter crew. And that's kind of where we're at now. And the 3 to 4 employee plus the 2 of us seems to be the sweet spot for execution of the projects and then working in a way we like to work.
And Maria, what is your job? What's your role in all of this?
I mean, we definitely have very, very separate roles. There's very little that I do that he does, and vice versa. And I often think of myself as his manager in a way, that I do whatever needs to be done in order to keep him doing what he does best, which is working with the architects, working with the designers, doing the design work on the projects, and then the execution and managing projects in the shop. And so everything else about running Whetstone is then my purview.
Which is an awesome setup, because I have a strong belief that craftspeople like Isaac and really, really passionate crafts people, they would almost do better with a manager, like a talented actor would.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
Yep.
Yeah.
And because a lot of the super talented people I know, they don't want to have anything to do with business. They're not very good at business because they care too much about the work. And to have someone managing, I think it's such a cool setup that what you guys have going.
Yeah, they're two entirely different skill sets. 100%. You need different demeanors, different everything. And so
You have
to do both.
You have to be as good as you are. You have an extreme attachment to the work.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when you have an attachment to the work, it's tough to sell it for the right price and say no and do all the crap because you just want to do this beautiful project.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that is true.
Tell us a little more about your attachment to the work, because I happen to know it's amazing and impressive, but where does that come from, you think?
I don't know exactly where it comes from, with the exception that I just have always made things and really enjoy building things. And for me, that's where I get a lot of joy out of. And so because I enjoy it so much, I throw so much of myself into it. And that is why it's so hard for me to separate myself from the business side of it. And that it's really my mentality is much more about having a good time making something.
It's a beautiful thing that you've been able to turn your passion for liking to make cool things into a business.
Yes.
Probably a lot of his ability to do that is because we're working in metal and there's not as much competition in the metal working side of the world. And so just knowing a metal fabricator, especially at the beginning when we would really take on any job and Isaac would do just about anything, it was an easier way to get our foot in the door.
Yeah. If I call an architect and I'm like, hey, guy, I'm a really good painter, they're like, dude, see you later, man. We don't need join the club of 1,000 other really good painters.
Yeah.
But when you guys call and you say we do incredible metal work, their ears probably perk up because not a lot of people do it.
Yeah, that's true.
Let's talk about that, because this is one of the most impressive things is how you've been able to penetrate this ultra high end market and build the demand and get in with these designers and these architects and these builders that are working on these projects that are, they're not just going to the phone book and calling people to work on this type of stuff. How did it start to be able to work in the world that you work in today? What did that journey look like?
I think the way it really started is we just blindly called a couple of architects in Boston and just said, this is what we do. We sent them a couple of pictures and we said, let us at least come and talk to you. And we showed up, and we did a lunch and learn where we just brought a bunch of samples, kind of talked about what we did.
And when he says a bunch of samples, it's usually someplace between 100 and 200 pounds of samples.
Yeah, I think our very first, we've called it quite a bit, but I think our very first one, we brought 2 chairs that we made, amongst other things. Like, it was literally a truck full of samples, and we just showed up and just unloaded everything into their conference room.
We're a spectacle. We're not trying to be, but it's hard not to make a lot of noise.
Yeah, and so we brought so many different ideas that we thought about and created and showed that, and there were less concrete samples of this is what a door is, it was more of, this is a really cool juxtaposition of 2 materials, or this is a cool joint, this is a cool finish. And we can take these cool things and apply them to anything. What kinds of things do you need this applied to? And then talking through about how we made it and then kind of what we could do to apply it to their project. And it was a much broader presentation of thinking and finishes and kind of materials, more so than we're selling a product. We were more selling that we can collaborate with you to produce whatever it is that you want in whatever capacity it is that you want, and that we have the skills and the experience to execute on that front. And I think that was, it's a very different presentation than saying, hey, we make 3 doors or 3 window styles. You can pick whatever 3 you want for your project. If it's outside of that realm, we can't do it. And so we're open to a lot of possibilities in that front.
My mind is like blown. That is because that is such a great way to go about it. It's so smart, and I'm going to get into how you got there in a minute, because I know I would go, look at this cool thing I can do. Look at this cool thing, because you're passionate about what you're doing. And what a designer and architect really wants to know is like, the good relationship I have now, they come to me and they go, I have this idea for this thing. How can we make it happen?
Yeah.
And we go back and forth and we collaborate. And there we're not a commodity. We're not just a dime a dozen and just put freaking paint on it. But I've never thought about it as I've never had as clear of a vision of how can we work with you to get what you want. And let's talk about the approach stuff more than we talk about the detail stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I went, we'll probably get into it more, but I have a degree in industrial design and I went to art school. And so I understand a lot of the theory of how a design comes together, and that, it's pretty broad and it's much more about a thought process than a finished object. And you get to the finished object, but it's more about how do we work through these, whatever constraints or limitations we have, to come up with something interesting. Than I have a very constrained idea of what I want. Can you execute it? And it's much more, I have this, and this that I'm trying to solve for. What is possible? And then talking through that, or being like, oh, we have this interesting sample here. And then that starts a whole conversation. And then like, oh, that cool thing could turn into a grill over there. And then we could pick up this finish over there. And then it kind of just explodes into a bunch of possibilities versus a very narrow bandwidth. And so I think that's a big part of how we do our presentations, is like, it's a thought process of how to approach the whole project.
So we should all just go to RISD, get our degrees, and then start our companies. Is that what you're saying?
Totally. That helps a lot.
I bet. I mean, the first time I heard you tell me that, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to RISD tomorrow, and I'm going to get my degree so I can talk to designers on their level. And you were like, maybe that's not the best idea. Maybe you could find a more effective route.
Well, you're at the same position now.
Yeah.
It just helps get in the door sometimes.
Totally. And I love that idea of finding ways to solve problems for these at the ultra high end level. They're talented designers and architects, and the more I'm always trying to add things to our quiver, more tools in the toolbox for the designer to go and implement. Because I've been struggling with, I always struggled with, as many painters do, being a commodity, being seen as just another guy, and we'll find a cheaper price to do that same thing. And so I've been looking and continue to look for unique coding systems, unique approaches to things. How can I be different so that I can have those conversations and not be judged on price?
Now, do you find that you are the main contact for your customers, and that you are the one in your company that's doing the collaboration and the back and forth, and that you're, doing the thinking part of the job before you're handing it off to your employees and saying, this is what we came up with. This is going to be the execution of this particular job?
A lot of the times. It depends. Sometimes there is some like I work with the bigger picture idea stuff, but then I look to my leads to sort of tell me how they want to approach this more. and sort of what's possible with a finish, maybe. But yeah, I think I definitely work hand in hand with the designers more and the clients more. And then I might take that and communicate that to the guys who are actually doing the work. And then we kind of come up with something and then come back to the client. Like, should we brush or should we spray here? Or what product should we use here? And what's the technique?
But
But
your
yeah,
point of contact is you, and the designer is like, I'm calling Zach, or am I calling ZK Painting?
I mean, at this point, they're calling me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's probably how it will always be.
Yeah.
And the same for you, because I don't want to let go of that.
Yeah. No, you can't.
That's we have a lot of similarities, Isaac, but then also I'm trying to get away from that. It's funny. I'm always in this like internal conflict of like, where am I at? But I think we've talked a lot, and we know that we're sort of similar and sort of different. And it's so impressive to me, the level of work that you guys are able to execute and the budgets that these things, what it costs to do this kind of stuff. And like, how the heck you ever get it to be able to sell this kind of stuff. You've clearly figured a lot of things out. So I would love to go into more and more detail of sort of, so you called up architects out of the blue, scheduled lunch and learns, showed up with more samples than you could possibly imagine, but didn't talk about about specifics, but more about approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, usually it starts off like I'll do, a slideshow, maybe like 10 minutes of a PowerPoint with like some portfolio pieces of ours. And we try to make them relevant, but definitely at the beginning, our portfolio was so small. We had what we had and that was it. And then afterwards, I basically give the floor to Isaac and he asks them what projects they have coming up. And it just kind of begins like a brainstorming session. And we're able to kind of like insert metal and talk about ways that we can use metal. And the designers get very excited usually, which is a wonderful thing to see. And that's when we see wheels turning and they're like, oh yeah, and then this other project. And then they think of projects that they did in the past and they're like, we could have used you, or, where were you then? And that's when we're like, all right, this definitely could be something good.
And one thing I think that is important is we were talking to the designers first. When we first started Whetstone and kind of moving in this direction of architectural fabrication, our main group of people we spoke to and interacted with were designers and architects. And we sold them on what we were trying to do and what the execution of the project was. And then they got excited about it, and then they were able to leverage the contractor and the clients of being like, no, this is really special and really important, and I want to see it in the project. I think if we started more on the contractor side first, there's another layer and another filter you have to get through to then convince the designer, who then convinces the homeowner. And so I think going through that channel helped get our projects in the door and get them awarded, because they were our champions and say, we want this, where the contractor's more concerned about very different things than
things that we didn't have at the time, like
than how something looks or works. They wanted, are you going to be on time? Are you going to come in budget? Are you going to work well with other subs? Very different priorities. And so we kind of focused on the designer side, and that is who we wanted to get convinced first. And then we would then work on convincing whoever was contracting the project to actually use us.
I think there's a lot of lessons there for paint contractors who want to get into the high-end world. Yeah, you guys are doing crazy decorative metal stuff and it's amazing, but I think that same concept can be applied to painting, where I'm not going to show up and just use the same paint as everybody and talk about the same stuff. We're going to give them we're going to be like somebody just said, like, we're going to give them special things that make them different. Like, us, we are one of a handful of people who can do this thing.
Yeah.
And now, like you said, they call me and they're like, I was thinking about doing this thing, and I'll get these like inspiration pictures. We got this Indian, I think it was like an Indian statue of like an elephant. It was crazy. Yeah, I think it was, but I'm not sure if it was him. It was some crazy ornate statue that a designer texted me a picture of, and they're like, "Oh, we were thinking of doing gloss on this. Do you have any ideas?"
Wait, gloss on a statue like you would paint
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Do you do that?
Yeah. I mean, we can paint. There's a primer for every substrate. So, yeah. But like that's what I've been working so hard to do, is to be in these designers' minds as somebody you can call to or talk to and go, "Hey, I was thinking about this. What do you think?"
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think an interesting way to think about it is, I know you recently posted some photos of a gloss white ceiling in Boston, and some of the photos you were taking were a reflection of the skyline in the ceiling. And that's a very different, unique look that you can only get from that one type of application. And you, as the painter, you need to be aware what's going to happen with your paint, and that applying a gloss paint on the ceiling in that kind of location is going to add this extra effect. And you're being like, this is an extra little special thing. You get, when the light is right in the room, you're going to get this awesome reflection of the Boston skyline. Only way you can achieve that is with gloss paint. If we put a satin in there, that is just out the window. And so your job is to kind of think about what your products and your skills do that what your designer may not be aware of, and that you really need to think about what is going to happen to this space once I apply this finish, and what kind of freebies are they going to get out of it from like an unexpected beautiful thing. And I think that is the difference between someone who's just slapping paint up on it and someone who's looking at the room and being like, well, if we do this, you get this outcome. If you do that, you get that outcome. And thinking about it in a more artistic standpoint than just a execution standpoint. And I think
Yes.
Get the designer excited, you have to think about it how they're thinking about it. And it's not just what color is it, it's what's the feeling, what's the light, what's the mood, what are these extra things that are happening.
It's so true. And that's just not standard in my industry, to think and talk to clients and designers like that. And I love that idea. Like, that is what it's about. It's about, how does this feel? It's about the outcomes of what we're doing. And too often as painters, I want to talk about what I'm doing. Wow, I'm going to do 6 coats of skim coat. I'm going to use this automotive sprayer to spray this thing. I'm going to thin it. I'm going to use this awesome paint. And they're like, we don't give a crap about that. What's it going to do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, oh, man.
Yeah, and you needed, in that example, you needed that location of that window to give you that effect. If that was same finish, one room over that didn't have the window, effect is gone. And so it's you have to just be aware of what's going to happen.
Yeah, and talk to our ideal clients on their level.
Yeah.
And not on my level and the way I want to be talked to.
Correct.
Yeah. It's huge.
And then that's when you get to talk about all the different levels of sanding and priming, and being like, that's why we have to do all this to get that nice reflection.
And if they care, they'll ask me about the details.
Yeah.
And rather than me wanting to like hold them hostage for 5 minutes while I go over my process, which I've done more times than I want to admit, because I was excited about what we were doing, not what it was going to, like the overall, what it was going to, I was excited about the details and nerding out about the application of paint.
Yeah.
And because I know what it meant later.
Yeah.
But I wasn't talking about what does it mean to the client.
That's for you and for painters. It's not for I think there's some amount of a story involved for the homeowner and the architect or the designer, but that's more two different subsets of information that you're managing.
It's a great point, and I will be continuing to double down on that design approach. Because, I mean, what you guys do, I mean, do you bid against guys very often, or what does that process look like?
I would say generally, as far as I'm aware, most of our projects at this point, we're not bidding against other workers. I think there are a few that will be bidding on the same project, but the majority of the time, if we're losing a project, it's going to just a completely different material or completely different spec. And then what our bids more look like and talk about is if we're over budget, kind of reining that back in and figuring out what we can do at the desired budget, and then what those implications are, and then thinking about, well, this is what originally was wanted, but we have to save 20% of the money. What things can we cut? What things can we keep? Let's give as much of the full experience as possible. And I think most of our projects at this point, we're quite fortunate that it's more about working together to get to a price point than bidding against a different metal contractor, because what we're doing, so much of the work is design and vague at the very beginning stages, and it's not ever like an apples to apples construction. We're working with the designers very closely to design what they want, but like whatever I come up with is a reflection of myself in our shop, and it's just whoever another metal worker is going to come up with, maybe it's another staircase, but it's going to be different. And so it's never a direct comparison, versus we're not both applying the same paint to the room, and it's who can come in at the right budget. It's more of like, well, you're offering this at this price and they're offering that at that price, and then they have to decide what they want.
And so in my world, that could be the specialty paint finishes. So if in a perfect world, a client comes to me and was like, I kind of want this effect. They don't bring me a completed sample from a store and go, I want this exact thing. Because again, now 6 people can make that exact thing. In a perfect world, they come to me as the contractor and say, well, here's the thing I was kind of going after. Can we work together now to get some samples to try to get to that point? That's where now I have leverage when I make the sample that they like. And more importantly, if I somehow got in their ear as the person who makes the sample, that could maybe make a sample that they would like outside of the box, the more I see it, the more that's the valuable thing. That's how we then get down the design process to a completed project, to a project where we're not competing against 3 other people and they're just going the lowest price. But in my business, that's pretty tough to do, and that's where we've been learning other things, high level paint application, and then the metal stuff and some Venetian stuff, because we just want to be a little different.
Yeah.
Tell me about your design process.
I mean, it does. So usually the design process starts with a conversation with our designer and a sketch or a basic drawing about what we're going with. And then in metal, the final finish has a lot of implications of what the fabrication process is going to be. And so I try to kind of start at what the final finishes are and kind of what we're working around, what our constraints of budget and materials are, and then work backwards from there, because we can each metal is a little bit different. You can get them in different, some some metals you can get in certain sizes, some you can't. Some will cut easier than others. Some will bend easier than others. And so there's so many considerations. So we have to start kind of end product and then work back. And then it's then looking at kind of what tools we have available to actually produce it. And then I build all of our projects in a 3D modeling program called SolidWorks. And so what that helps me with is it's a pretty powerful engineering program, and I use it in a same manner of how we would produce it in the shop. And so it kind of helps me work through what my production process is. And then in tandem with that, we're going to then also work through what our finish schedule is. And so, because the finish schedule, I mean, just like you guys, there's 50% of our time on any given project is dealt with finish work. And so, and of that, it's like then split pretty evenly between sanding and grinding and polishing, and then like patina application and spray finishes. And so kind of all of those things then come together. We usually build a little mock-up of whatever we're going to be working on to kind of just suss out all those small details, and then present that with drawings and that mock-up to whoever our client is at that point. You know,
the patina thing.
Oh,
let's talk about patinas, because they're mystifying to me.
Me too.
But they're obviously a huge part of what you do. How did you learn how to do all this stuff?
A lot of it is trial and error. I think one of the great things about art school was it taught me that nothing's precious. And so I'm able to work through revisions very quickly and scrap something out and just start over. And so patina's a very particular thing where it's a chemical aging of a metal, and so, or staining, and there's so many variables that affect it. And so the base texture of the metal affects it, the temperature that's applied in, the humidity level that it's applied in, how it, like the shape of the object, and so many things come together, and we've just come to the conclusion it's so complex that we never get it right the first time. And it basically, every time we bid a project, we assume that we have to patina it 2 to 3 times to get it to the level that we want. And it's just assumed failure. And that's been the best way to do it, because you can get a project to 95% of the way there, and then there's one little black spot or one darker section or one scratch, and you can't just get rid of it. You have to then strip everything back down and start fresh and then build that thing up again. And so we've developed a few different processes over the years to kind of minimize that. And but it's a very frustrating and unpredictable process, to say the least.
It's very similar to high gloss.
Yes.
Do you have to redo, like completely strip back and redo it?
Generally not like completely, but generally like an extensive amount of sanding has to happen. And for a long time, our doors were just sort of planned to have, you know, there's going to be 2 or 3 extra coats on this door just about every time.
And so if it's not coming out just right, are you just sanding that coat back a little bit and then reapplying?
A lot of times, if you get a drip or a sag in gloss, you have to sand it out. You have to apply more paint. You have to sand that out, and then you can get back to, we're kind of building our layers. And so when we get to a certain layer, we go to the next one, we go back to that layer from before. But, you know, kind of what you're saying of like, you try to control everything that you can.
Yeah.
But sometimes like a speck of dust shows up right at eye level on a style on the door, and there's just like no getting, or a bug. You know how many times a bug landed on my gloss door, and you're just like, how is there a bug? The one bug finds the gloss door in the final coat. and there's nothing you can do but sand it out and start over.
Yeah.
So
I mean, one thing we've really spent a lot of effort on in the last couple of years is kind of work holding and how we handle our pieces, because they're usually pretty heavy and awkward. And I'm sure you guys have the same kind of issues because you can't flip a wet door and paint the other side. So you have to think about how you're going to handle that piece to get to the execution. And so once because like similar to paint, once you're in a patina, you can't just grab the piece. Otherwise, even though you might be wearing gloves and you're not imparting oils onto it, you're just going to disturb the finish somehow. I don't know. with how you handle it, and then you can't solve for that. And so what we've kind of worked towards is how do we manipulate and handle our pieces from final sanding through patina and then into our spray booth to seal everything. And that's probably something that you guys think about when you have odd shaped projects and things that like how do you physically manage that?
we just had a metal coffee table delivered today that took a forklift to get off a truck.
Yep.
And that one's going to be fun to manipulate.
And you're painting it?
We're putting manganese, a 75% manganese, 25% bronze mixture. We're spraying it on, and then we're wire brushing a texture into it.
While it's wet?
No, after it dries.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it needs to be moved one time. We need to seal the bottom of the metal one time, just this little edge. And then we're going to have to take 4 people and it's solid metal. This thing weighs so much. And flip it once, and then, now it's on casters. But it's big and wide. And, the fast rack. What's that?
You just have to think about how you're going to manage it.
Before we ever start.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, before you start. Like the whole process of what can we do to move this through our process easier and more efficiently.
I think we both are in worlds where the stakes are very high.
Yes.
And so when you're in these high stakes worlds, it starts to pay dividends to take little steps of cheap insurance, buying cheap insurance all along the way. And in at least in my field, the average, just like repainting a bedroom, this is not a very high stakes thing. And so I didn't grow up being taught to take little steps of buying cheap insurance here and there to just make sure it all works out when you go to do it. Because if it didn't, you can fix it in 2 seconds. It's not a big deal. But when you get into these high stakes things with timelines and the amount of time it takes to redo something, now it starts to be like, well, let's think some more. Let's spend plenty of time thinking before we do.
Yeah. And we'll also do something for 10 hours because we know it will work, even though we might have a solution that might work in 6. But if it doesn't work, you're back at square one, and then you're either at 12 hours or 16 hours, and so we definitely err on the side of caution of do that a little bit longer and safer to get to the result, to be very confident about what our end result is going to be versus trying something new or different or kind of half-assing it with
that's definitely been my experience. And that is a lesson I had to learn the hard way because I was not taught that growing up. How do you teach it to your employees?
It's a good question. It a lot for us, it all just starts, like the finish of our objects all start in the grinding room. And so it's just been really simplifying the steps to where, you could use this tool or that tool and kind of get to the same end finish just as quickly or faster, I should say. but it has higher stakes. And so we'll just focus on really understanding those fundamentals of this is how long it takes, this is what it takes to do to get to that finish. And I want them to experience sanding it for that long, because it then imparts once you start using a different tool or a different process, you kind of understand how it's better, because you can kind of see it changing, but then also you just handle your work pieces and you go through the grits better, because just like with what you guys do, if we're bringing something up to, a 400 grit finish and we're starting at 60 or 80 grit, if you leave an 80 grit mark and you bring it all the way up to 400 and then you see it, you're going all the way back to 80, and you're starting that over again. And so I just am just take your time and make sure, just 100% be confident that you got that done. And I'm not rushing to push through of get that finish done faster. It's just take the time to do it. It's, we have a lot of high stakes work, but I would say I'm generally not cracking the whip on speed as much as I would love things to move faster through the shop. There's just so much. Spending 2 extra hours to sand something out is that you get done is so much better than getting further down the line and finding out there's a flaw that's harder to take out later. And so that's just how we manage it, is just, it's okay to take the time to do the job that you need to do.
There's so many parallels to what we do. I was just talking to 2 of my guys today about our gloss process, and going forward, we're going to be going with the safest, lowest margin for error. Probably takes more time.
Yeah.
Using a Swedish putty process of multiple coats of this hard to sand, oil-based, slow drying putty versus fast drying, easy to sand skim coating. And because one of them, it's harder to sand, so it's harder to screw it up.
Yeah.
And it's just like we were talking about, it's at this point now, we've resanded so many things. And I was thinking to people, to myself, the best way to teach your team about how to take the time to go slow is have them have to redo a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And eventually they're I don't want to have to redo this thing 17 times.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have a problem that you have to redo it, but you're going to have to redo it.
You're going to redo it, man.
And I'm just, that is, I think, exactly how we manage it, that it's just, you're got to just put the time in to do it. And there's no shortcut there. And I think, and we do, just like with that putty, we err on the side of conservative. We know this is going to work, and it sometimes takes a little longer, but it's still faster to plan for that amount of time and execute it properly in that amount of time than to plan for less time and have to redo it.
Yeah, because the stakes are too high. And that's what I love about this, that being at the high level. It is it's awesome to have these budgets and these timelines, because now you get to start thinking like that. You get to start making these decisions where you have to be smarter and not just put your head down and just run through a wall. It's no, let's do this the smartest way to get the most predictable outcome, because like you said before, what matters to these GCs and to these clients is a high level product, but it needs to be done on time.
Yeah.
Maybe the budget's flexible, but the timeline, people want their stuff.
Yeah, that's what we struggle with the most too. Is that is by far our greatest shortcoming is timelines. Just because it's hard. It's really hard to do a good job in a prescribed amount of time when there are a lot of opportunities for failure.
I want to talk about lead times and long lead times in a minute. But before we end this idea, it occurred to me that the key piece that we've sort of left out as we talk about what we just talked about with giving our employees and our team members the ability to go do it right. And if you do it wrong, you have to redo it. It starts with having passionate employees and team members who care about doing good work for good work's sake,
Yeah.
right? Because there are some people who will just be like, fine, I'll just resand it every time. Like, I don't care. I'm here clocking 40 hours. I'll do whatever in those 40 hours, right?
Yeah.
But both of us, we need team members who care about doing good work because of the intrinsic like satisfaction they get from saying
it's essential.
Yeah, you have to.
There's no way around that.
We have found that people don't last long here unless they really love what they do, because there's too much failure to not enjoy that some amount and not enjoy that challenge and be persevere through it and be passionate about it, because there's many ways that you can approach failure, and I think what your mindset is really dictates how well you take it. Like there's you could have the same scratch in a piece of metal or a piece of wood, and like how it got there and how you approach dealing with it is different for each person. And it's like, was it an oversight because you were working too much, or you had poor lighting, or because you dropped a screwdriver on it? Like, and something, like if it's someone who really cares, they're going to be like, oh, I knew that thing fell over and I was hoping it wasn't going to be a problem. And someone who's really passionate about it will go and check before it's a problem down the line, and kind of learn from it and work through it, versus just be like, something fell over, and just keep working through it.
And then they go home that night and they think about, how could I prevent this next time?
Yeah.
Right? All of our team members have that buy-in of, we care about doing this so that we can say that we're professionals as much as to get a paycheck. And if without that mindset, I mean, everything that we're talking about kind of doesn't matter. So, which I think is a good point. I didn't always understand that before, but the type of person that we need in our companies, the type of employee and team member is somebody that cares about the quality of work for their own sake, not as much like, you have to want to do this type of stuff, right?
You have to enjoy a good struggle.
Yeah, it's a temperament for sure.
For 100%.
Yeah.
So, all right, I got that. That was bugging me. Let's talk about how you deal with these long lead times, because you have way longer lead times than I do, and I struggle. We both struggle with this custom world of 700 people, a million steps, design changes all the time. It's not a perfect science, but how do you manage the long lead times on these projects? Do you have any tips?
No, I would like to have them.
I gotta say we found a method. We don't have an approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think we do our best to plan, and be proactive, and check in with contractors and kind of see the status of a project. But it's so often that there are things outside of our control that just will royally screw up a timeline. And then you just kind of have to do your best to get on top of it and get a better understanding and communicate with whoever you're working with to find out what are the important goals and kind of milestones to keep things moving forward that need to happen, and just do your very best to manage it,
Well, I would say one of the ways that we have thought more recently these last 2 years is putting in jams for doors.
Oh yeah.
That's
so there we worked on a few kind of large built-in door projects where we realized that if we could get in at the very beginning of the rough framing process, we could put in some metal work that were kind of rigid points that all the other trades could work around. And then we could, while they're doing their job, we could then come in, we could be building whatever that finished item is in the shop and then just install it at the very end. And so I think that's one of the things we've implemented kind of across the board, and we really think about to kind of streamline that process a little bit more so that we can control, so that we have more control. So like if we're doing a shower as an example, we'll set aluminum at the level that we want the finished tile to be at. And then the tilers, whenever they are coming in to do their tile work, will come in and tile up to our reference point. And we set that reference point so we know where it is, so that we can then build our item in the shop. And then it's hopefully then just a bolt-in item because we've kind of constrained those openings. And, you know, it requires, you know, pretty high level of coordination with multiple trades to kind of get that done. But it does streamline a lot of things because it also cements layouts earlier on and kind of forces everybody to think a little bit harder in the beginning, you know, the contractor and the designer, to kind of get all of those questions answered and sorted through so that we can then finish out what we're doing.
And you probably have the same issue because you're coming in at the end after everyone else is finished and all of the problems have snowballed and started sliding down into this pile at the end of the project. And so you're dealing with the culmination of every problem that the project has ever had.
Yeah.
Yep. And the emotions of the client who's felt every single problem.
A Labor Day party in their house, and you're like,
I can't do it.
It's not going to happen.
And now I'm delayed and you're mad. The framer, he was delayed by 3 weeks and you couldn't have cared less.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Now I'm delayed by 3 days and you're losing your mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing I was talking with a mutual friend of ours, Rich Costa, today, another talented metal worker, and we were talking about clients and their expectations and timelines and stuff. And he's a one-man operation, struggling with that stuff. And I think another huge piece to this puzzle that we have control of is what we promise and how we like sell and market ourselves up front, right?
Yeah.
We're the artists, and guess what? If you want this artist, it comes with it doesn't come with everything. You have to, if you want us, it has to kind of be on our terms.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, you're just like, somebody pay me to paint something, and now it's like, well, wait, I need X, Y, and Z in order to do this project. And if you can't give me those things, then, you know, maybe this isn't a good fit. So I think that a huge defense against that kind of timeline pressure is having the leverage to say no to projects, or just to say no within a project.
Yeah.
Right.
It's real hard to say no.
Do you get, I think we talked about this last time we hung out, where it's the end of the project and they keep adding stuff on. They're like, oh, just do this one thing, or like, how about this other thing?
So what I tell clients is when I'm working on your project, you get 100% of us. So if you want to add 2 things, you can add 2 things. But that's same true for the client before you. So if I can't get to you the day I was hoping to, you have to understand that's because I was given 100% to the person I was working for.
That's a really great way to put it. I like that.
You know, and Jessica Allred, a friend of mine who's I was actually connected Rich and Jessica today because they do a very similar thing. They're one-person operations, highly skilled, and she has a queue system where it's just like, you are in my queue, and when I get to you, I get to you. And she's on retainer with clients to get higher on that list, and it's just like, she's just like, 2-person operation, I can only do so much. But when Jessica works on your project, you get her heart and soul and everything, and she gives you everything. But that might mean you have to wait because somebody else she's given 100% to before that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you get when you get into this artistry level and not just a commodity. And the more we have the option to say no, the more work I have coming in, the easier it is for me to be, to set my ground rules and go, hey, I used to tell clients, I'm going to take your front door for 5 to 7 days to do it. And I would freak out because I was begging them to let me paint their front door for pennies. Now it's a 2 to 3 weeks every time.
Yeah, hope you got some good plywood up.
like, hey, it's 2 to 3 weeks. That's it. And if that's not okay with you, we can't do the project.
Right.
And I can only say that because I have an abundance of work coming in. I have more work coming in than I can do. And I'm very passionate about that equation being in that direction.
Yeah.
Right? Because the other way around, I suffered for too many years of I needed work all the time. And when you need and you have no leverage, magically I'm saying I can do it in 7 days and I deliver a door in 8 days and they hate me. Yeah. Or
how old is ZK painting?
ZK painting, I started ZK painting like 9 years ago as I painted a flip house for a friend's dad for $15 an hour out of a Ford Taurus. That was it it was very not professional for many years. And about 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, it became something that started to be a company that started to be built.
Yeah.
But I think it's all those hard lessons that shape us. And hopefully all the fine people who are listening they won't have to make as many mistakes because they can learn from us. Which would make them amazing human beings if they could listen to this and not go do the same thing that we did. Because I know that they talk about wisdom and knowledge, and wisdom is when you can learn from others' mistakes, and knowledge is when you learn from your own.
Yeah.
And I try so hard to practice wisdom today, but it's not easy.
Yeah. I enjoy making my own mistakes, I have to say. I do like to do it myself.
Yeah, and that is a thing that we all have, and sometimes, but there's occasions where content like what we're putting out right now can help somebody a little bit. And sometimes we're like, you know what? I give up. I got to do it another way.
Yeah.
It definitely happens.
I'm a big believer in downloading that information so that the day that I'm ready to give up, I have it ready for me, right? I might not learn something and implement it tomorrow, but I'm going to learn it so that when I'm desperate enough to change something, I'll have it and I'll know what to do when I finally have the energy or the will to go change.
Yeah.
I
would have to use that as a way to plug the 10,000 small business program from Goldman Sachs. I would say that I learned a whole lot of skills from that program, and it was free, and it's available to any business in Rhode Island, and it's available nationally. And for the running the business side, if you're passionate about something and you're good at doing something, but you don't quite know about running a business, or you're already running a business and you just need all the skills that maybe you think going to business school would help with, that particular program was extremely helpful, because we were already running with it, and it was a way for me to ask all the questions I wanted to ask and get some good answers, and a good business community as well.
Well, that's it. I'm doing it because that's the second time I've heard it today.
Yes.
Oh, really? Who else?
I heard it on a podcast today. I was listening to. The guy had done that.
I cannot recommend it enough. And I still speak to my business advisor. I still speak to my classmates that I went through, my particular cohort with, and it was great. 110% recommended.
All right. That's what it's the Goldman Sachs 10K small business.
Yeah, small business program. So Goldman Sachs funds the program, so it's free to all participants. But the curriculum that they put you through is developed at Babson. And so a lot of the professors and guest speakers that you get at the program travel nationally and speak all around the country. And it's just fabulous. It's like, it's intense, it's short. You know, it's not like you're spending several semesters at business school, and you basically are workshopping your own business. So it's not theoretical. You're not learning about whatever. You're doing your own business, and you're right there, and you're surrounded by people who want to help you the whole time.
I can't wait. I love it. It's funny how that stuff works. So we've talked about it before, but no, I'm not. I'm sorry, I have to answer this one. Tonight's episode is sponsored by Waterloo, not White Claw, John. Yeah, I'm excited because I'm always looking to learn more, and I've decided. I was talking to my team this week, and I've spent the last 6 months of my business with a primary focus on sales and marketing. Heavy focus of my time was on, and mostly marketing the business and building the demand side. And now I'm transitioning my focus from the marketing side to the production, the operations side, the operations of the business. And I'm hoping that it's like the marketing side, where I wanted nothing to do with marketing for so long. I couldn't stand the concept of it, never mind actually doing it. And now I love it. So I'm hoping, I can't stand the idea of getting into the operations of running a business.
It's just
a
project.
Yes. And that's where, like,
you know,
I'm hopeful that I will just go, all right, it's just like marketing. I don't like it, but now I'm going to read a bunch of books. I'm going to talk to a bunch of people. I'm going to spend my time thinking about it.
So you know, I think it's through Commerce RI in Rhode Island that there's a bunch of free or subsidized programs about operations, and they teach, forget what it's called, but it's like the Japanese method of optimizing any kind of factory or manufacturing or even an office setting. What is it called? I'll send you the link afterwards.
Yeah, please.
All sorts of great programs that, you know, either you go and take, you know, a conference session, or someone will come in and Rhode Island will subsidize that person coming in to kind of take a look at what you have. Polaris. That's what it is. Polaris.
How do you spell that?
Polaris, and it's Polaris MEP. So
that I love the idea of somebody coming in. I've always just fantasized, come in and like whip me into shape.
I mean, I know we didn't have the greatest success working with them, but it's because I think controlled chaos is just what we have going on. But if you want to standardize what you're doing, then that's definitely the way to go.
I'm excited and nervous because it's not what I like to do. But it's a lead domino in my business, and that's always what I'm looking for, is what's the one thing, if I do it, will make everything else easier.
Yeah.
And at this point now, it's the big glaring thing that needs to be tackled.
How much space do you have where you work out of?
We have two, it's about 1,800 square feet, and then we have an upstairs, which is like another 800.
So you're doing all of that painting and processing in 1,800?
With my office is upstairs with another 800 and some storage, but yes. And we were 900 square feet for up until a year ago.
Wow.
I had like this little tiny section in front of the booth that we would prep, and then the booth took up 2/3 of our shop. Yeah, it's tight.
Yeah. How much is our office?
2,000.
Oh,
You have a lot of space in your office.
We do.
have a ton of space.
The office is ridiculous. It is.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's as a business owner, my job is to keep finding where, if I put my energy, will benefit the company the greatest. And
It's
I think
inspiring, Zach, to see how you kind of work your way through very methodically and you build your habits bit by bit. It's really cool to see.
I was a mess of a human being 7 years ago, so I had to get good at getting better at life because I was just not doing very well. And so now, I'm a big believer in facilitating greatness in myself and other people. And it's like, in an analogy, if you don't want to drink, don't be near places that sell alcohol. And the same thing is like, if you want to do great stuff, like surround yourself with people who are doing great stuff, read books about stuff. And, eventually it just becomes your world. So I'm very cautious of like what information I take in and what I surround myself with.
It's that very yoga-like approach to the world, being considerate of everything, like not just what you eat and you drink, but just your immediate environment, the humans and the information that's around you.
Because, the information's huge. There's so much garbage that people are trying to throw down our throats.
Yeah.
If you turn on a TV, look out. It's all over.
I know. We run into that with, every once in a while our daughter, gets her iPad and, squirrels it away in her room and she gets this, 5 minutes of unsupervised time with it. And in a very short time, she will go down the most garbage, hole of where you can go on the internet and the things that are, it's like the Doritos or the Hostess cupcake of entertainment. It's just meant to be consumed with, and there's no value and crazy. And I have not given as much thought about it until now we have a child that we have to decide, what she's consuming. And there's a lot of garbage.
Totally. So let's talk about sample making. You go through lots of iterations with a design to get to a final point. Then you make a control sample, get it signed off, and then make it? Or what does that look like?
Yeah. So going back to what I was saying earlier, so we'll send out samples from our sample library of all sorts of finishes to get an idea of what the scope of the project is and kind of establish a baseline of what people are looking for, because there's so many different ways we can approach it. So brass, as an example, every alloy of brass, which there are many of, and they come in, you can't get them in all the same shapes, are going to affect how a color looks, a patina sample looks. And so you might be able to get some extruded angle or bar stock, and that's going to be more gold. But then when you start working with sheet, it's going to be more yellow or more red, and like you might be able to bend one easier than the other or weld one easier than the other. And so I like to kind of get a really broad scope out of what the expectation is, and then once I start diving into what the finished design is, remake a more controlled sample using the real materials and the real shapes and the real kind of finishes that we're going to do, and then kind of work through what that process is. Just because our projects are so different for the most part, project to project, and then very much year to year. And so how you would approach something that is handheld is going to be very different than how you would approach something that is the size of a room. And so a handheld item, I might be able to dip in a patina and get a very even coat, but I would never present that finish for something that's going to be a big, long panel. I may start with that one and then take those same colors and be like, well, we're not going to actually be able to achieve this on such a broad field of color. It's going to end up looking like this. And so then I'll remake that sample to work through it. And I really enjoy the sample process because it kind of just lets me think pretty quickly about how we're going to construct and make and produce this thing. And for me, it's extremely informative of what the production process will be down the line. You know, so our samples are simultaneously finished samples and then also construction samples. You know, because we're trying both at the same time.
I find that we are making a lot more samples than I've ever made in my career. And the more we get into the higher end and the more we are trying to find predictable results, and the more we are really, I've probably done more samples this year than my entire career combined. And I like what you said about that dipping thing. If you're not going to be able to dip the piece, don't do a sample dipped.
Yeah.
We do the same thing now, where if we're going to do a gloss ceiling, we're going to spray every single step upside down in simulation, because if I do it flat, that's not a test of what we're going to get. And if I hand a client a sample that I did laying flat and then I go to do it on a ceiling, it's just, they're not the same thing.
No.
And which is fine when the stakes aren't very high and no one really cares. In those cases, you don't even make samples. But if you want to do this at a high level, being able to replicate the results that you sold is so important. And, you know, I think that I didn't always get that.
Yeah.
A couple people asked, do you charge for samples?
It depends on who the client is. I mean, with people that we do a ton of work for, generally we don't charge for samples. If it's somebody who's new, I